Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Ohannessian. I am the ambassador for the ASLN here at CSUN. Let me know if you guys can or can't hear me at any point. My internet is not the strongest, so if something happens, feel free to let me know. I am a senior here at CSUN. I'm double majoring with animation and film production with an emphasis in cinematography. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. And then let me know if you guys can see this.
Oh yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool, thank you. Alrighty. So what this presentation is going to cover is the basics of storytelling. We're going to go over the story structure itself, how to compose a story and like the elements within it, as well as some cinematography basics like shot composition, scene composition, and then we're going to go over just a few editing techniques to keep in mind while you're creating your stories and your boards and your animations. So really this is a general overview for whatever path you go into within animation. So here we go. So first of all, coming up with the story itself is always the hardest part. You can't start something, you can't build animation without having a very strong story. And what I've noticed that a lot of students struggle with that core element, which is the story. So when you're trying to come up with a story, you typically don't know where to begin. And these are just some notes that I've taken, like how I start to. Oh, I just realized. So we are recording. So if you don't want to be in the recording, just as a heads up. But coming up with your story, you can have writing prompts you can look at. Take an aspect from your life, from your own experience, and you can expand on them. And then we're going to go into this a little bit more in the next slide about your main character, but try and find someone or something that inspires you, and then why that person or why that thing inspires you. The story often writes itself once you have that inspiration, and feel free to do some note taking. If you're struggling with a story, just go for a walk, and sometimes the idea will just come to you. And it's good to just pull out your phone, little notes app, and just write it down. And then this is more of a general thing, but like have a clear genre. So when you're thinking of what you would like in your story element, a lot of students go a little overboard. They go, oh, it's going to be like a horror, thriller, comedy, dramatic, blah, blah, blah. It's like stick to one genre for now, and then you can expand on it later. Let's see, go next. Okay. So your main character is the most important part of your story. You can't build things without your main character. And these are the three questions that you have to ask yourself. Who is your character? What is their goal? And how can you prevent them from reaching that goal? So a boring character is a boring story. You have to breathe life into these characters, otherwise you're just watching nothing. It's not interesting. And feel free to go into stereotypes, not the offensive kind, but if someone is shy or quiet, really expand on that, really make them shy and quiet. Or if they've got like an anger issue, really like pull out that anger. You can't just, kind of have them be angry or kind of have them be whatever. You have to really have them feel something so that the audience can feel something. The protagonist doesn't necessarily have to be nice, but you have to sympathize with them. So they could be evil, but you have to understand why they're being evil. Your antagonist or your activator is something that opposes the protagonist from reaching their goal. So this doesn't necessarily have to be a person, but it does have to be something that is preventing them from reaching a goal. And then the conflict is the protagonist and the antagonist and their opposing wants and needs. So the elements of the story structure, you've got your beginning, your middle, and your end. The beginning is the exposition, where you find out everything in the world building, in the character itself, and as well as the antagonist. The middle is all the events that lead up to the end, which is the resolution. So a story is a series of events. However, a series of events isn't necessarily a story. So you have to keep that in mind when you're writing something. Everything has to build on top of each other to get to your end goal. And then always avoid deus ex machina, which translates to God as machine. Back in the olden days with the Greek tragedies, a lot of times they had these characters that would have their battles, have their conflicts, and then out of nowhere Zeus would just come save the day. And that wasn't fulfilling. So avoid things like that. Always keep in mind that whatever happens because of your character and their end goal, and then how they overcome certain obstacles. So over here, I have COOA, conditions, objective, obstacles, action. So this isn't necessarily a formula, but it's a piece of advice given to us by Donald Petrie, who's actually a director. He visited our classroom a couple times in film production, and he gave us these notes right here. So your conditions, your objective, obstacles, and action. The conditions are things like what environment are you in? What's the rules of this world? What's the rules of even the scene that you're in? This isn't necessarily just in take for like the overall story. This also partakes for individual scenes as well. So what are the conditions? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it night? Is it day? That kind of thing. And then what's the objective? Why do we care? What are we going forward to? And then what are the obstacles? What are the obstacles preventing someone from reaching that objective? And then what are the actions that this character takes to overcome these obstacles based off of the objective, based off of the conditions? So they all build on top of each other, and you have to keep these in mind. Otherwise, your story and your scene is not going to make sense, and your audience is going to lose interest. So these are some notes that I took when Pixar had their little event last semester. This is essentially not necessarily a formula, but this is what they use to kind of narrow down their story so that they can build on top of it. So this is essentially like the skeleton in a sense. So you've got your 3 acts. Act 1, once upon a time, so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. And then every day they did this. And then until one day, this happens. And then Act 2 is because of this event, then this happens. And then because of this event, that happens. This person does this person does that. Then you get to your Act 3. So finally, blah, blah, blah. And ever since that day, everyone lived happily ever after. And then you've got your morals. It's usually like, what message do you want to tell an audience, rather than like a simple thing as like, be prepared. It's got to be like an actual message. And then keeping in mind your character's goal, what their wants, what their needs are, and then what are the stakes. You've got your internal, external, and philosophical stakes. And then this is just an image of the 3-act structure. So you've got your Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, the setup, confrontation, resolution, and we're going to go into detail what all these are. So your Act 1, you establish everything, and it's the exposition, and you set up all the information that advances the story later on. And then once you establish everything, you've got the inciting incident, which is something that happens to trigger a problem in the story. And it thrusts the story forward. It really propels the next series of events. So you have to keep this in mind. If you're writing a short film, like maybe a minute-long story for an animation class, oftentimes it's not necessarily the 3-act structure, it'll be a 2-act structure so that you can not waste any time and get along with the story. So, but you still need to establish where you are, who you are, and what's the problem. And then Act 2 is developing the story. So you've got your rising action, which, you know, it's just action that's rising, 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 and it's individual scenes or shots that lead to a larger point in the story. And they're obstacles that are preventing the main character from reaching their goal. And then each obstacle that the character overcomes is a lesson that the character learns, and then they still end up getting closer to their goal. So you get various series of obstacles, like getting higher and higher and higher. It's harder and harder and harder to get to that goal. And then you reach a point when the character is at their lowest point. They just drop dead to the bottom. But they find something out. They figure something out. And this major event, all of a sudden, they got it. They know what they have to do, and it thrusts the plot into a brand new direction. And then you've got your third act. And here's the image again, just for reference of what I was talking about. So this is the resolution. You've got the big climax. So everything that was leading up to this point, this big old climax, and then the biggest moment in the story. Everything's like the most tension is in this moment right here. And then once everything is like settled, you've got your resolution. So here's this image right here, if you wanted to look at that real quick. And just remember, you've got your act 1, 2, and 3. But if you're doing like a really short something, you can just exclude 1 act. So you can end up with 2 acts instead. But you have to be careful with that. You have to make sure you have all these elements in there. So now we're going to go into the basics of cinematography, essentially how you take the story that you've written or that someone else has written and then translate that onto the screen. A lot of students tend to struggle with that, and I would like to help a little bit. So you need to have proper scene coverage. So we're going to talk about the different types of shots that there are. You've got your establishing shot, which sets up the scene, and it's typically a wide shot, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a wide shot, because an establishing shot just shows you where you are, what you're doing. And of course, you've got this wide shot over here. And then you get closer and closer, and you get to the full shot, which is from the head to the toe. And this invites broad acting. So like you can see in this pose right here, this is Gru. And like you remember this scene because of the broad acting. If you had done like a close-up and he's delivering this line, it's not going to be as effective. Next, we've got our 3/4 / our cowboy / our Western shot. And this is done from the head to the knees. And this shot actually came about in old Western films from the early 1900s. And the reason, I got something from the chat. Oh, where can we watch the recording? It's a good question. Well, I'll get back to you on that. So I was talking about Western shot. Okay. So the Western shot is typically from the head to the knees, and it was developed in the old Western films to show the character and their weapon. Now here on the right, this shot is used correctly. It is shown with this character in the front, and it's got her and her weapon. On the left over here with Emmett, it's not really done correctly. He's got no weapon, so it's very, they just did this shot because it's a Western scene. And then you get closer to your medium shots, which is typically the head to the waist, and it emphasizes the dialogue. So when your character has something important that they're actually saying, this is the shot that you would want to focus more on. And then as you get closer, you got your MCUs, which are your medium close-ups. So that's from the head to the chest. And this is more for like the dialogue slash your emotions, your facial expressions, that kind of thing. Usually like a reaction to something. And then we've got our close-ups, which are from the head to the shoulders. And this usually highlights something relatively important, as well as the emotions and the reactions of this character. Typically, sometimes you get dialogue, but usually it is just a reaction. And then you've got your extreme close-ups, which are from the eyes to the mouth, that distance. And it usually emphasizes something important to the story. So like you've got his sash over here, right? If you were to do like a wide shot for that, it no longer is that important. So you got to use these shots wisely. And by keeping these in mind, you understand what these shots mean. Now we're going to focus on camera angles. So what are they and what do they mean? You can't just willy-nilly throw in a camera angle because it's got to have a purpose. And then in animation, oftentimes you have to have someone draw that whole background out if it's 2D. So you need to know what you're doing. You can't just throw things around. So you've got your low angle shot, which is also known as the upshot or the worm's eye view. So what this is you've got your subject and you've got the camera, and the camera is lower than the subject, angled upwards. So it's like this. And what it does is it makes the subject seem much more intimidating and powerful. So they are in charge, essentially. And usually you should be afraid of them, or they're just like, ha ha ha, I'm the best, you know, that kind of thing. Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. So we've got, okay. Sorry, I'm talking too fast, my bad. So again, with this low angle shot, it's, you've got your subject and the camera is lower than the subject and it is angling up towards the subject to make them more powerful and more intimidating. And then we've got our high angle shots, which are our down shots. And this is the reverse of the other shot. So it's essentially going to be the camera is above the subject angling downwards, and it makes the subject seem like feared, isolated, they're lonely. And as you can see here with Elsa over here on the left, she's clearly like in a state of mind that's fearful. She's not like intimidating in the slightest in her perspective. And then here on the right, we've got our Dutch angle. This is literally the camera tilted. And it gives this like uneasy, disoriented effect, like something's not right. Something's very clearly wrong, you know. That's what that Dutch angle means. And it's very good if you want to give like a horror type of feeling. And yeah, there it goes. Okay. And then we're going to talk more about the over the shoulder angles. So this offers perspective. So literally it's like the camera is as if it was placed over someone's shoulder, and it can be as like far out as say the one over here in Finding Nemo, or it can be as close over here as Avatar: The Last Airbender. So it's essentially the camera is like placed over the shoulder to offer a perspective on that character. So now we're going to talk about framing. And one of the important aspects is the aspect ratio. So if you're going to do something for a feature film, the aspect ratio is 1:85 by 1 units. And if you're going to go for television, it's 16:9 units. Gaming is also 16:9, or if it's one of those ultra wide screens, it's going to be a 21:9. And this is important to know because if you're going to start boarding something or animating something, and you want to utilize these different types of framing or different types of perspective shots, you don't want to accidentally do an awkward shot, which is when you cut off the subject's heads or like their hands or their feet. It's an easy mistake to do. So it's unfortunate when people make that mistake. So keep in mind what your aspect ratio is, so that when you start to do these types of shots and it gets converted to different things, you don't accidentally cut off like the tip of someone's head or like their fingers. And so keeping the aspect ratios in mind, we move on to our rule of thirds. So this is this is a very staple rule that everything should be on a thirds line to increase its importance. So over here, you've got Flynn Rider and Rapunzel. They're on the thirds line. So imagine an imaginary line just right here and right here. And the lines aren't like a box, like a boundary. They should be on those lines. And then again, there's an eye line here and then over here as well. So essentially it's like a third going that way too. But usually the third means from up to down. As well as here, you've got this third over here. If Kubo was a little more towards like this side, it would look kind of strange. If he's walking, that's great. But if the scene just started and he's just walking right here, it would look kind of strange. And same thing with here. The rule of thirds really helps you with the framing, the proper framing of these events, of these shots. And same over here. And oftentimes the rule of thirds helps with comparisons. So over here we've got the Iron Giant and this tree. With like following the rule of thirds, you can compare that the Iron Giant is as tall as a tree, as strong as a tree. It just keeps like a mental image in your head, like, oh, okay, he's intimidating, but he's also compared to this object. Next, we've got the middle of the frame. And this usually is saved for shots to show that you are being isolated. So over here, we've got Russell, and he's all by himself. And we know that because he's right in the middle of the frame. And we've got all these different aspects kind of just framing him right in the middle. Same with here with Aladdin. He's like right in the frame. He's got the, it's like this high angle shot. It's looking down on him. And you can tell that he's at a low point right now because he's by himself, he's in the middle, and it's like this low angle down on him. And the same thing with here in Coraline. So she's right in the middle, and she's got like this framing happening with her with the door and the tunnel. And you know that she's by herself because of this framing, and that she's going to go venture to save her family because of this. And we've also got a Vanellope, again, by having those leading lines towards her face, you can tell she's right in the middle and she's all by herself. And in this case, she is fearful. And then to further with the leading lines, we've got division. So by having either an object or a subject divide something within the screen, you can really portray like the conflict with just a picture. So there's this interesting saying we all know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So just looking at this picture right over here, you've got Quasimodo's hand from Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he's dividing the screen right down the middle. And on the left, you've got Frollo, and on the right, you've got Phoebus. And the camera is placed very low to the ground. And by doing it like basically on the ground, we can see that Phoebus is terrified and he could be caught at any second. And then over here on the left, we've got Frollo, who's very intimidating. He's got this very intimidating presence. He's got the power in this scene. If anything were to slip up, he would win. Character's goal would be gone. And this division right here shows that in this triangle that he's made with his arms, he's protecting Phoebus and he's choosing this as his goal. He's no longer following Frollo, he's choosing this as his goal. And again, this image lasts barely a few seconds. So when you're doing storyboarding or you're doing just anything in general with animation, by keeping this stuff in mind, it can really further develop your story. And again, to further prove that point, on the right here, we've got the Prince of Egypt. So here's an original storyboard from the film. And this shot, it made it to the film, and you really have to pause for it to see that shot. But it's in there, and it's in there for a reason, to show this division between the two brothers. You've got Ramesses on the left here, divided by his brother, and in the background you've got his past, his legacy, the pharaohs and all of that. And then on the right you've got Moses, and he's wanting freedom. Now we're going to talk about camera movement. And so again, with everything you do, it has to have a purpose. Don't just start doing pans for no reason at all. It has to have a purpose. So for your camera movement, a lot of static shots are typical. This means the camera is not moving, it's just there. Always start out with your static shot. And if you want to include movement, then you build on top of that. Because sometimes less is more, and you don't want to overexert your audience, and then they're just going to get nausea. They're going to be like, oh, I can't focus on this, But once you want to add some camera movement to liven it up, you've got your handheld or shaky cam, which gives a more realistic feel to the subject. So it usually is used for fear, but oftentimes it is just to get more personal with the character. And then next we've got our zoom in, zoom out / our push in, push out, or in animation it's called the truck in, truck out. So these are different. A lot of people use them loosely, but they are different. So a push in or a truck in is when the entire camera actually moves closer to the subject. And this is what's used in traditional animation, just because the technology isn't as advanced. And again, with a truck in, truck out, it's the full body of the camera moving towards the subject or away from the subject. With a zoom in, this is more towards 3D, and it's the lens that zooms in or out. And what it does is it has the subjects pretty much the same, but the background shifts dramatically when you do the zoom in and the zoom out. So if you were going into 3D animation, this is good to know, because if you start using these terms loosely, then it's not going to have the same effect that you want it to. And then of course you've got your pans. It's from camera going from left to right. That's the same everywhere. And you've got this image here on the right, which it's a mixture of pans and pushing in and out. Right, there we go. So another interesting camera movement is when you're circling the subject. So this usually highlights importance or uncertainty. So as an example here, I've got this famous scene from The Lion King, and the camera is moving around Simba. He's standing in one spot, as well as Scar moving around him as well. So you've got this like uncertainty happening, but you know that Simba is the center of this attention in a sense. And then you've got your shifting focus. So with this presentation, I wanted to show both aspects in film, television, 2D, 3D, just to show that these aspects are done, these methods are done everywhere. So you've got your shifting focus, which essentially is a shift in perspective without having to cut to a completely different shot. And then I wrote on here, on-screen movement, avoid static shots, it's a movie. Again, you don't want to overexert your audience by having too much movement happening, because sometimes less is more. However, if you've got your camera and it's a dialogue scene and they're just sitting there talking for 30 seconds, nobody's going to pay attention. Their minds are going to drift. So you do have to have some kind of movement, just so that your audience is aware that, you know, this is a movie or this is a TV show, just that your audience doesn't get bored. And then this is more towards 3D, but lens work. Like a normal lens is 25 millimeter, and the longer the lens, the bigger the depth of field, and it makes the background more distant from the subject. So say you've got a 25 millimeter lens and you've got your subject here, and there's like a car in the background that's like 30 feet away. With a normal lens, it'll look like it's 30 feet away. With a longer lens, it's going to look like it's 50 feet away. And a shorter lens, it's going to look like it's 10 feet away. So this is more towards 3D animation because of the technology that you can use with it. But what's funny with this, we had, I think his name is Patrick Lynn from Pixar. He was a director of photography. He came to CSUN like a year or two ago. And he was explaining that in this scene, in the live action-esque elements with Riley, the camera is, it's got like a longer depth of field, and it's also a little bit handheld to make it feel like it's more realistic. Whereas when we travel into Riley's head, which is like the fictional type of area, it's very static shots, closer to the traditional animation of just regular pans and truck ins, truck outs, and the lens is normal. So you can use this stuff to your advantage, even in animation. And then again, lighting, this specifically applies towards 3D. So you've got your key, your fill, and your back. So your key is typically towards the camera, and then I'll explain in the next slide what the different areas mean. But your key is typically right next to the camera, and it creates the shadows and the directionality, and it reveals that 3D shape. And then your fill creates your its mood and emotion, and it modifies the shadow to be as sharp as you want or as soft as you want, depending how harsh your light is. And then you've got your backlight, which separates the subject from the background so they don't blend in. So I've got some examples from animation, as you can see. So the most famous, oops, let's go back here. No, go back. So the most famous lighting and the most common lighting is the Paramount lighting. It's also called the butterfly light, in which the key light is basically right next to the camera, and it creates this little butterfly shadow right under the nose, as you can see here with How to Train Your Dragon. There's like this nice little butterfly shadow right under the nose, and it highlights the cheekbones. It makes everything really symmetrical. She's got it over here too. And you can see it a little bit more with Elastigirl here in the middle, this like butterfly shape of the nose. And it's actually in many actors' contracts that their character has to have a certain amount of screen coverage and shots with this specific lighting, because it's the most attractive lighting. And then once you get your lighting to go a little bit more, then you get your loop lighting. So over here, you can see on Woody, there's like this loop like this shadow just around his nose. And that's what happens when you've got loop lighting. And then you got your 3/4 lighting, which essentially is the key light gets a little bit closer, not to the side, but a little bit closer to like this 3/4 shadow. And you can tell when a subject has 3/4 lighting when they've got this nice triangle of light right on their cheek. It's a very distinct triangle. That's how you know you have 3/4 lighting. And then this lighting, side light, is mainly used in 2D animation as well. The other ones, not so much, besides Paramount and side lighting. So side lighting is straight down the middle, the key light's right next to you, and there's like a very distinct line straight in the middle. Half your side is dark, half your side is light, and it always implies that your character is on the cusp of making a decision, and it's a very important decision that they have to make. So they're very split, they're very torn on something, and they're about to make a decision. And this is used a lot in 2D animation, so keep your eyes peeled next time you see it. And then this night look, again, this is more for like 3D and not so much traditional animation. But fun fact about Klaus is that they actually used 3D lighting techniques to light their film. Even though it's a 2D animated movie, they use a lot of 3D techniques. So how you get that is you get no key, but there's 2 backs and a fill, which creates that dark effect. And then I wrote here silhouettes, and that just means the lighting is important with production because it makes your character stand out and helps them place them in this environment and makes it look real. And it helps determine them from the background. You don't want them to blend in with your background. So that's why lighting is important. Now we're going to talk about the 180-degree line. So this is when you're storyboarding, even if you're just regular animating, this is stuff to keep in mind so that everything flows nicely. So what's the 180-degree line? It's this imaginary line between 2 characters, and they're talking with each other. They've got some kind of interaction going on, and there's this line coming through them. And so you're supposed to stay on one side of the 180-degree line. So whatever shot determines that, you have to stay on that side, otherwise it's going to get confused. So I've got this example here. So here's how the scene plays out. You've got Prince Zuko here on the left, and he's facing right. And you've got Katara here on the right, facing left. That's your 180-degree line right there. You've determined that that is where these characters are looking. And let's say you don't follow the rule and you flip one of them. Well, now who's he talking to? Who's she talking to? You don't know. They're not looking at each other, even though like in the script it says like they're talking to each other. By not following this 180-degree rule, all of a sudden they're not talking to each other. So you have to keep this rule in mind. However, there is an effective way to break it. In this same episode, you've got our 2 subjects, Prince Zuko on the left and Commander Zhao on the right. And this is established. This shot here establishes that 180-degree rule. So you've got him still following the rule. See, he's still left facing right, and he's still left facing right. And you've got Zhao on the right facing left. And then what happens is the way they break the 180-degree line rule effectively is they show, he's still on the left, he's still on the right, but then it shows him passing the other. It like physically shows the other person passing the other, and then all of a sudden it cuts to a shot establishing this new 180-degree rule. And then of course it cuts to this new 180-degree rule. So that's an effective way to break that rule. Another effective way is by having the camera actually move around and like showing the camera moving around. So whatever you do, if you're going to break the 180-degree rule, you have to show it. Otherwise, the audience is going to get confused. And then the same thing with screen direction, it's the same concept. If your character's going from screen left to screen right, and then all of a sudden you cut and they're going screen right to screen left, your audience is going to be confused. So you've got to show the character either stopping and then going the other direction, or you have to show the camera following them to the other direction. So those are effective ways you can break it. And then I'm only lightly going to touch on color just because it's more of some like color job. There's like color, some like a colorist's job to do this. But it's good to keep in mind when you're doing like lighting and stuff because it's fun. You know, purple and pink usually means love or royalty. Blue means usually means sadness or freedom, depending on how you interpret it. Green means evil or means life. And then reds and oranges, they're usually energy or warmth or fire. And usually associate red with food or with some like anger or something like exciting that's going to happen. And then yellow, it just means happiness, you know, yellow is just happy. And then, so these two down here are to show the differences in high contrast and low contrast. So you've got Chef Cousteau over here, he's in high contrast. It very much singles him out as him being the most important thing in that shot. And then on the right here, you've got Carl Fredricksen, is very low contrast. He basically blends in with his environment. And that's also another form of symbolism for his character at this point of the story. So now we're going to go over some things to keep in mind for editing later on. This is not so much of like actually editing, but things to keep in mind for the editors. So again, every cut you do has to be motivated. You can't just start cutting willy-nilly and you can't just have random shots here and there. So a lot of people forget to have reaction shots. This is really important because a reaction shot is what sells the action that just happened. So, you know, you've got over here, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And the shot prior to this was the hamburgers falling from the sky because his invention just worked. Now, you wouldn't really remember that scene until you get to this reaction shot. Everyone remembers this huge prolonged phase, the reaction that he has towards it. So if you forgot that shot, all of a sudden the action that you had just done becomes meaningless. So don't forget to have reaction shots because it's easier to take them out rather than to just force them in somewhere. And it also further develops your character and their emotion. And next we're going to talk about match cuts. So there's two types. You've got your cut on motion or your cut on action or your transitional match cuts. So the cut on motion is what the example that I've got here on the right side. So what a cut on motion is, you've got more than one shot, but it's the exact same action happening. So you've got here Miguel, and he's playing the guitar, and his hand goes from here all the way down. But in between there's 1, 2, 3 different shots. And what it does is you have to cut very specifically so that it looks like it's the exact same movement, even though it's the same action, and even though they're different shots. So what you do is you have to change the camera angle in a way that the action, the subject, is in the same place. So what you can see is his hand is here, and then it goes to here, and then when it cuts to that different angle, it's in the same spot. Even though it's a different angle, it's still in the same spot. So you understand that that is where that action is going. And then again, when it comes out to that wide shot, it's there, and it's still in that same spot. And all of these shots boom, 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 like within a few frames. It's just boom, it just goes straight through. And well, why do people do that? Well, why can't you just have that one shot and just have him do it? Because it further develops and makes it more realistic. It makes the emotion more impactful by seeing the different views of something rather than just have one big wide shot and just have it go straight through. By having those different perspectives and cutting them through that action, it really furthers the character and the action itself. And then over here, the transitional match cut, this is when it's going from a different scene to a different scene, a completely different action to a completely different action, different subject, different subject. So over here, we've got this character over here, and she's in the exact same framing. She's got this very specific framing, specific angle, and right underneath, it cuts to a different shot, different location, different subject, different everything, but it's that exact same framing. And what it does is imply that their mentality is the same. So with these match cuts, both the cut on motion and transitional, the thing to keep in mind is that they're making sure that they're the same. Whatever it's happening, it's the same. And then jump cuts are when you don't follow these kinds of rules, and you want to avoid jump cuts as much as possible. So when you're doing animation, when you're doing boarding, try and keep these in mind so that the person who's editing doesn't have to figure out those, doesn't have to run into those problems with the jump cuts. Occasionally, when you break these rules, you can use them towards your advantage, but it's very rare. So, as students, I strongly recommend you not doing that. Always follow the rules. And then again, you've got cutaways, cuts. Those are very self-explanatory. And then insert shots are a very similar thing as your reaction shots. So essentially, it's a close-up of something that's part of the master scene, and it tells the audience what's going on specifically, and it establishes further what's actually happening. So let's say you've got a scene where a character is in a meeting in an office, and they're writing something in a notebook. If you just have a wide shot of the character writing in a notebook, that's fine. But if you cut to an insert shot of a close-up of what the character is actually writing, then it further establishes the story and the character as well. And what if he wasn't even writing something? What if he was just doodling? Then you gave your character some personality. So by keeping in mind these little insert shots here and there, remember, it's easier to take something out than to add something in at the last second. So always keep these kinds of things in mind. And then with timing and pacing, just remember, if you've got an action scene, don't have a camera stand very still for like 30 seconds. That's not an action scene. No action's happening. So just, feel things out. Keep in mind what you're supposed to be doing. And then with continuity, if you've got a character that's drinking tea or drinking coffee or something, and then it cuts to some other character talking, and then it cuts back, and all of a sudden they don't have that cup of coffee anymore, that breaks continuity. You don't want to end up on top 10 continuity mistakes on watchmojo.com. You don't want to do that. So what you do is you have to show the physical action of like someone putting away the coffee, or it could even be in the background, but you have to show it. You can't just cut to that person no longer having it. And then this is just some general tips to wrap things up. Getting in the zone. Let's say you were given a really dramatic, action-packed scene, and you're not in the zone. You're not really feeling it. What I usually do is I listen to instrumental music that like correlates to that part. So if I've got this really heavy action scene, I'll listen to like Pirates of the Caribbean, dun, 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 something like epic to get me in that mindset. And the same thing, if you've got like this really sweet, tender moment, you don't want to be listening to Pirates of the Caribbean. You want to listen to something else, just to help you get into that zone and understand pacing. Music really has a way of telling its own story. So by subconsciously, you follow that with the instrumental music. And also, don't be afraid to go deep into your emotions. Let's say you've got a character who like tripped and broke their arm or something. Um, think of a time that you had a similar experience. Maybe you were like 5 years old, you tripped and you skinned your knee. Um, it helps you understand the character a little bit better and what the emotions are going through. So obviously they're probably sad that they hurt themselves, but when you think about it more, they're probably scared. They might have been nervous. They're also probably embarrassed. So already you furthered your character a little bit just by placing yourself in their shoes. And if you have writer's or creative block, take a walk. I know it's COVID time, so just close your laptop and like go around your apartment or something. Just like if you're just so frustrated with something, just stay away from it for a little bit. And when you come back, oftentimes the brain will have subconsciously fixed that problem while you're away doing other things. And usually your idea will come to you, and you'll be able to refresh your brain, and you'll be able to see what you're missing or what you don't need, that kind of thing. And if you're really having writer's block, I recommend watching similar scenes to what you want to convey. Like if you're supposed to board out a scene, and you just don't know what to do with it, watch something similar. Don't copy it, but understanding the timing, the pacing, just the general flow and the feel of it really helps you take inspiration. And again, I said this earlier, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you're really stuck on like how you want to frame something, just remember, what is this character going through? At one point of the story, is this character in? What's their mentality as of now? And that'll help you determine just that basic shot, and then you can build on top of that. So that concludes my presentation. Again, none of these images are mine. I did not work on any of these films, clearly. But yeah, Dean Kelly is a Pixar story supervisor. So I recommend following him if you're interested in that, as well as Todd over here. They're both board artists, board supervisors. And if you have any further questions for me, just in general, or you need just another pair of eyes to help you feel something out, I got my contact down here. It's 5:56 right now, so if you have any questions, feel free to know, and I'll be on here really quickly. Okay, and then where can we access the recording? So that will be determined by the ASLN, but I do have the recording here, so it's recording right now. And if something were to happen to the recording or anything, I'll feel free to share this presentation with you guys, the actual slide, so you guys can look back on it. And pictures worth 1,000 words. Once you remember that, you'll be able to see it and be like, oh yeah, that's what they're talking about. So yeah, and thank you to everyone that's saying thank you. That really means a lot. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, just let me know, and I'm here. Okay, I got a question. When writing a story for a 10-minute episode of a cartoon, does it need to include climax? Yes. No matter the length, it does need to have a climax. When I was talking about earlier, when you can get rid of one act, and honestly, it's between 2 acts, you still have to have those elements within the story. It's just not going to be as long to call it its own act. So you got act 1, act 2, act 3, setup, action, and resolution. You still have to have those. But if you're short on time, the resolution can be quick, or the setup can be quick. It just has to be quick, is essentially. Yeah, no problem. And yes, be safe, everybody. That's very important. Did anyone have any other questions? Oh, thank you guys. Yeah. So I did notice that some people came a little late. So again, if you want any feedback or anything, just let me know, email me, or even on Discord, you can DM me and I'll help you out with your story. Just another extra pair of eyes. Yes, fellow Armenians. Thank you, Linda. All right, I think I can stop the recording now.